Hi, everyone. We'll just give everyone a minute or two before starting so we can allow all attendees to come through from the waiting room. Hi, everyone. This is Chris Lethbridge from the China-Britain Business Council, and it's great to have you all online for today's CBBC webinar, Success at a Distance, Make China Work for You from the UK. Before we begin, I'd just like to remind everyone that if you have any questions you'd like to submit to Christina, you can do so at any time using the Q&A function on your screens. So today is the third episode in our series entitled Success at a Distance, Making China Work from You from the UK, where we look at the steps that businesses can take in the Chinese market while travel restrictions are still in place between the UK and China. Today we have Christina from Woodburn Consulting joining us, who will be covering the topic of planning the financial aspects of doing business in China. All businesses require thinking about the financial expenses when they do expand in international markets, and this is even more complicated when you've got international laws and foreign currency and distances and all sorts of other things involved. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Christina.
Thank you, Chris. I'll just share my screen. Oops. There we go. Good morning, everyone. I'm actually doing a series this week that the CBBC campaigned also on, and it's about getting ahead of your China numbers. One of the biggest mistakes that companies make going into the Chinese market is not actually reviewing their numbers. And the amount of excuses that I get about not being able to read the P&Ls and balance sheets because they're given in Chinese, but nobody being proactive about translating them or not asking questions on how things are being booked and the type of accounting that is being used in China. It's just incredible. And in the end, what a lot of companies do is they ignore their China numbers. They try to create them from their head office, and it's never matching. So I don't know how companies have the ability to make decisions on their China business without actually looking at their China numbers and having resources on the ground to be able to facilitate that. So this week I'm doing a webinar series. I do one every single month, and the CBBC helps me to market these series. And we're doing a webinar a day all about getting ahead of your China numbers. And yesterday we were looking at how to get your profit out of China. And today we're going to be looking at financing options, how to create your budgets, and how to just make sure we are on the right path in terms of our spending and in terms of developing control processes to control our spending. Before I start off my presentations, I usually like to know who's in the audience. So we're a small group today. Please don't be shy. Do type up in the chat or in the Q&A who you are. And this gives me a bit of an understanding on your backgrounds and gives me a bit of an understanding on how I should direct the themes that we're talking about today. So if you are a newbie in China, if you are a startup in China, or if you're an experienced China hand, just type it into the chat box, newbie, startup, experienced. And again, this probably gives Chris a bit of an understanding of your background as well as myself in terms of who you are and how we can steer this presentation. Nobody's written anything yet. Please don't be shy. Type away, newbie, startup, experienced. The webinars that I perform, I usually want people to be as interactive as possible, hence why I will have certain interaction slides. How the webinar works is I'm here to educate you. So if you've got questions, if something was not clear or transparent, don't be shy. Put it in the chat box or the Q&A box, and we will have a Q&A at the end that Chris will moderate. Again, this is your time spent. Use it wisely and ask any questions that you might have. Chris is managing all of the technical side to the Zoom. So I'm free today on that aspect. But usually if you run into any technical issues, the easiest thing to do on Zoom is log off, log back in with your URL. And just know that today's presentation is being recorded as well. This is just an update on the series we're doing this week, all about getting ahead of your China numbers. If you are interested in the topics that are following up about preferential tax policies for foreign startups, VAT, value-added tax, what is the golden tax system, and how to operate your Chinese bank account from abroad, which is a current theme that is happening at the moment, then feel free to sign up. You can go to woodburnglobal.com/events to do that. So a little bit of myself. My name is Christina Kohler-Kalucha. I'm the head of business advisory at Woodburn Accountants and Advisors. I'm a leading expert on inbound investment to China. What does that mean? It means that 100% of my clients are foreign investors that are entering and operating in the Chinese market. I've got 17 years of on-the-ground experience in corporate services and corporate compliance, managing and administering the companies that my clients establish in the Chinese as well as in the Hong Kong market. I've worked with over 500 companies from a variety of different jurisdictions with pre-investment advisory into China and Hong Kong, the actual implementation of the business models that are going to be created. And the fun part of the job is actually helping these companies to then scale up and grow in China. Having been 17 years in the Chinese market, you can imagine the amount of mistakes and roadblocks that have come along in my journey. And my goal, my mission is to help new foreign investors avoid the most common roadblocks and obstacles that pop up along their way. And I've developed certain methodologies that can be implemented. I'm a big believer in system processes. And once those are implemented, companies then create and have the ability to create a solid foundation that they're able to grow off of versus a weak foundation where they spend more time on administrative issues versus thinking about scaling and growing. So that leads me obviously to this week's theme of topics around numbers. And obviously part 2 of this series that we're doing in conjunction with the CBBC is all about, do you have the financial resources to go into China? I ask my clients 2 things at the point of market entry. 1, do you have the capital to invest into China? And 2, do you have the time resource to do and initiate and implement that investment? If you don't have either, then now is probably not the time for you to enter the Chinese market. Because many people, many leaders, managers, companies, they underestimate the amount of capital that is required to succeed in China. It's not just about the upfront capital that you need to set up your business. It is about the ongoing capital that you have to invest within the first 5-10 years of your startup in China. And it is important to understand where you can, what type of financing options you can have in China, and ultimately how you can control your spending. China is a country of opportunity. Opportunities fall on your doorstep on a daily basis. Many of those opportunities require upfront spending. And if it's not in your budget, then you need to understand how you're going to control the capital that you've got to spend in China. So we are going to look at a couple of aspects in regards to financing and capitalizing your business in China, and the most common mistakes that happen. And obviously, a lot of these common mistakes, you're going to think, well, it's common sense. Why wouldn't those companies do those control methods? But like I say, on a daily basis, opportunities can fall on your doorstep. And as you are learning about how to do business in the Chinese market, you always want to grasp on those opportunities to see what will work for you and what won't. But it will require you to spend money. If you use that money within the first 6 months of your operation, you've got nothing left thereafter, right? And the question is, how do you then get more financing, and how do you survive in the Chinese market? So every single company that goes into China has different financial needs. There are some companies that have been transacting in China for the last 5, 10, 15 years, They need now an entity in China because they've hit certain trigger aspects or KPIs. And as soon as that company is registered and running, basically they're going to start earning revenue because everything is going to be filtered through that entity. They almost don't even need financing because everything will from day one be running through that company. There are others who don't have that luck and they are searching for clients. They're searching for ways on how to generate revenue, and it may not happen overnight. In fact, for many companies, it does not happen overnight. The media sometimes portrays that things happen like that in China, and it does not. All right. It may take months on end for you to earn any form of revenue in China. So like I said, every company has different financial needs. Every company will have a different phased approach to how they enter the Chinese market, but be assured everybody has a startup period. And the question is, how long is that startup period going to be for you? Will it be 6 months, 1 year, 3 years, 5 years? And be assured that cash flow during that period will be tight, and there will be moments where you do not have enough to pay for your simple necessities like office rent and salaries. So financial planning is critical, and the amount of smaller, medium-sized companies, entrepreneurs who do not place focus on the financial planning aspect of their business are the ones who in the end do not succeed in China. And financial planning doesn't happen overnight. Okay? You need time to investigate the market. But it is critical so that you can avoid any of the cash flow problems that will exist later on. Now, running out of cash is the number one problem that foreign investors have during their startup phase. And if you run out of cash, it basically means you miss out on opportunities, you can't arrange deliveries, potentially you can't even pay suppliers, and ultimately your whole operation might collapse because you can't pay wages, you can't pay office rent, customs duties, taxes, whatever else might be. And it is embarrassing, and it really can lead to creating a poor image and a poor reputation on your company if you run into these issues. I have had clients who thankfully have had loyal employees who have stayed working for companies with zero wage payment for up to 3 to 4 months until cash finally arrived. But I've had other clients who haven't been so successful, and after 2 months of not being paid wages, you have such high turnover of employees, you're starting from scratch again. Like I said, the goal of getting into China is creating a solid foundation, a solid base that you can grow on. You don't want to take 5 steps forward to then take 2 steps back, or take 1 step forward and realize you've got to take 5 steps back because you weren't creating the system processes needed to support your organization. And don't forget, nowadays, especially during COVID and during the pandemic, so the last 18 months, suppliers now are also taking legal action if you don't honor the payment terms with them. Okay, so it's getting to a point where, you know, everybody needs cash to survive, right? Everybody. We're in this stage of trend in China. Everybody needs cash to survive. And I get the comment a lot where I have clients who don't pay me for my services. It can be up to 5-6 months that I don't get payment. During COVID, I had one client who didn't pay me for a full year. And I did make exceptions. I was cash rich. I could survive. I managed. Was I happy? Not at all. But I did it. And luckily the client survived. I could not have done that though for every single client that was in my portfolio. So you do make exceptions, but ultimately you've got to realize that everybody needs cash to survive in China. The other thing that people underestimate is that customers may not pay you in time. So you might have done a financial plan with the assumption that customers will pay you as is dictated by the payment terms. Well, in many instances, that does not happen. I'm one of those. I'm supposed to get paid within 10 working days. For sure, I don't. By more than 50% of my own clients. All right. So I always say, take the reverse point of view. Estimate that people won't pay you in time and create your financial planning around that. But also create boundaries. What are you going to accept and what won't you accept? Financing your business in China can also be slow, and it is definitely more complex due to the strict currency exchange regulations and the inbound and outbound capital flows that are controlled by the People's Bank of China. So, if you do run out of cash and you have the ability to get more financing, don't expect that financing to hit your bank account overnight. It won't. It can take quite a few months before you actually have access to that cash. So again, something that people underestimate when they run out of cash. So what I want people's takeaway to be from today is ultimately that they need to define their financial needs. They have to do some form of financial planning. They need to do cash flow projections. How much are you anticipating to spend month to month? And you should be doing that before you even register your company in China. Because ultimately, you need to understand what will be your capital investment, what is physically going to go into that bank account in China, where you can utilize those funds to pay off for your local expenses. Okay. Now, if you run out of that initial capital, there are ways of doing capital increases, doing intercompany financing. There are some alternatives where you can get loans. And I'll go through all those financing options with you today. So the financing options, the first one I'm going to hit is registered capital. Now, China is unique in that when you register your company, you need to commit to a certain capital amount that is actually going to flow into your bank account in China, where you will use those funds to pay off expenses. Okay, and you've got to commit to that amount. And the timeline to bring in that capital is the term of validity of your company. So when you register your company, usually you can say it's a minimum of 10 years or a maximum of 50 years for the term of validity. There's no right or wrong in terms of what number of years you choose. Just remember that if you choose 10 years, it means you've got to inject that investment capital, that registered capital within 10 years. If you choose 50 years, you've got 50 years to inject that capital. All right. And this amount, it's registered with the administrative authorities. It's registered with the Ministry of Commerce. It's written on your business license. You have a special bank account where this money flows into. It's called the capital account, and it's controlled. All right. And you have basically until that term of validity to bring it in. And if you bring it in installments, it's going to get registered and filed with the Ministry of Commerce, as well as with your bank, as well as with the tax bureau, in terms of what's been injected and what still needs to be injected as the outstanding amount. Now, the amount of capital you inject is actually open and flexible, meaning that there are no minimum requirements when you look at China as a whole. All right. Ultimately, what the government wants you to do is to actually do a financial plan to estimate the amount of capital you will need to survive in China. However, having said that, there may be certain legal requirements for certain businesses. So for example, if you're in the freight forwarding industry, you need to invest 5 million renminbi in order to be able to get the freight forwarding license and the NVOCC license. If you are in e-commerce and you want to be able to get an ICP license, again, there's a certain amount that you need to inject. And then there are also going to be certain requirements based on the location that you choose. So there will be certain zones, industrial zones. There may be certain cities. There may be certain districts in cities where they will have a requirement, a local requirement for you to invest a certain amount. Okay, so it is important to know, again, what business activities you're choosing to do, where you're looking to set up your company, to know whether there's actually any restrictions that you might have around the capital you're going to be investing. And keep in mind, from an operational perspective, you need enough capital to generate a positive cash flow within your business. And if you don't do that, that's where it's going to be your downfall. And ultimately, if you don't do that properly, it can lead you, and it has led many companies exiting from the market. So due to the tight regulations around foreign exchange, as well as inbound and outbound payments into and out of China, it is important to know that the registered capital will go into a specific account, which is called the capital account. And normally you will have to inject that in a foreign currency, whether it's pound sterling, whether it's in euros, US dollars, Hong Kong dollars, whatever it might be. You may find that you have the ability to inject that also in renminbi, but then you are doing that exchange in your home jurisdiction, and you may have to open up a CHNY bank account in your home jurisdiction to be able to do that. Now, if you run out of registered capital, which, like I said, is common because the opportunities that fall on your doorstep are aplenty. And if you also don't implement from day one a financial controlling mechanism, you will discover that you run out of cash very, very quickly. You have the ability to increase your registered capital, but you've got to understand what the bureaucratic procedure is to get that registered capital increase approved. All right. There is an application that has to be made with the Ministry of Commerce, as well as then with the tax bureaus, as well as then with the bank. And this whole application can take anywhere between 12 weeks, so 3 months, up to 4, 5, 6 months, depending on the list of things that the government office has to do. So if you're lucky, it can take up to 12 weeks, if not sooner. And if you're unlucky, it can take all the way up to 6 months. You need to take this timeline into consideration so that if you do implement a financial controlling mechanism, as soon as there is a trigger on what is the bank balance in the registered capital account, you know, okay, we've got to go through that process to increase the registered capital. So there has to be a balance between timing and implementing these control mechanisms. Capital is vital. You can't, and like I said, you know, if you don't have the financial resources to go into China, then you are not ready to go into China. All right. It is vital to make sure you have enough capital to start and sustain your business. You've also got to measure your capital against the strategic plans that you are developing at least over a 10-year period. All right. So that you've got enough in your account to make sure you are continuously growing and scaling up in the market. Because that's what's everybody's goal in China. It is to scale up, it is to make money, it is to grow, right? That's everybody's ambition in China, all right? And if you don't have enough capital to achieve that, well, again, it's not the right time for you to be in the Chinese market, all right? Now, to understand how much capital you actually need, you need to think of all of your expenses. And of course, you've got the daily operational expenses like rent, salary, social insurance, housing funds, customs duties, taxes, logistics, marketing costs, etc. But you need to go into the nitty-gritty of each of those line items to make sure you are thinking of everything, of every single little detail. The second, and as the second part to this presentation, we are going to be looking at certain expenses, and I'll go through certain details about them as well. The second option that you have is the foreign debt loan. But this is a reminder that foreign investors have a cap on how much foreign debt loan they can inject into their companies. Okay. Getting a loan from a local bank in China is not easy, particularly in your startup phase, because you have no collateral, right? What collateral do you have to show? You're a startup. So generally, to apply for a bank loan, I would, here and there say, don't approach the bank until at least you've got 3 years of profitable history. And if you don't have that, then don't expect to receive a loan. So when you can't obtain a local loan, what do you do? The only option is what we call foreign debt loan. And to understand what the foreign debt loan is, you've got to understand these two terms: total investment and registered capital. So I've highlighted as option one the registered capital, which is the physical working capital that's going to enter your bank account in China, and it's the money you're physically going to be using in China. So the question then is, what's the total investment? Okay. And basically, the total investment is a ratio against your registered capital. And there are certain metrics you have to abide by. So I've created this table, which is a bit fuzzy. I apologize for that. But basically, if you are investing, well, let me go to the next slide, which is the actual example. If you're planning on investing a total of $1 million US into your China business, your registered capital, it would be broken down into the following: your registered capital, which is 700,000 USD. This is the physical money that will go into your bank account in China during the term of validity that you've chosen. Let's say a minimum of 10 years. And then you've got your foreign debt loan, which is 300,000. It's the total investment minus the registered capital. And the 300,000 will be allocated as your foreign debt loan. It never has to enter China if you don't want it to. I actually nickname this the emergency funds. In times of absolute dire need, you have the option of this foreign debt loan that can come into China through a loan agreement into a special loan account that needs to be set up in China, which you also have to think about timeline. It takes about 30 working days to open it, so that you've got additional funds that can be used. Now, there is a ratio, as I highlighted. This is the table of the ratios. If your total investment is under 3 million USD, you're looking at the maximum allowable debt as being 30% of the total investment and the minimum registered capital being 70%. If it's between 3 and 10 million, you're looking at a 50-50 split, and the ratio goes on from there, right? The majority of my clients fall in the first category of under 3 million USD. Many of them are investing much lower amounts than that. The lowest I've ever gone as an investment has been the equivalent of $10,000 as being the minimum registered capital. All right. So again, you can choose the value for your investment. It just has to make sense against your business activities and your business needs to make sure that you get positive cash flow and that you are able to sustain your business and pay all your necessary expenses on time. But this is an option to get emergency funds, all right? If you are looking to get loans from banks, probably your only bet is to get a loan from your international bank in your own home jurisdiction and start having those conversations. But to get it from a local bank during your startup phase will be very, very difficult. Just remember that any form of cross-border financing will require approvals locally, and documentation is crucial. Nothing can get done in China without a heavy list of documents. And just remember, any inbound, outbound payments in and out from China, they're highly scrutinized. Okay, documentation is crucial for all of that. If you don't have the documentation, the money will not go into your account. Now, services is option 3. So when you are in dire need of getting money and you are looking to survive in China and you're looking to continue your business, then another option, once you've used up your registered capital, you've used up your foreign debt loans, is to actually take the next step of creating service invoices or service agreements with the attached invoices with your headquarters or with sister related companies to try and get funding into your Chinese entity. All right. Just remember, the contracts have to be true and valid. There has to be substance behind them. They can't be faked. Know also that with these types of transactions, there is going to be tax applicable. One thing to highlight, register capital and foreign debt loans flow freely into China without any tax liabilities. And when you create such agreements, you also have to think about transfer pricing. You've got to think about the double taxation agreements that are going to exist between the two jurisdictions, China and whatever jurisdiction is sending funds over. Now, one option that I did not add into here that I do want to mention is investors. So obviously, if you are running out of cash, you might, as an entrepreneur, be looking for an additional investment from investors. And it could very well be that you are looking for local investors, Chinese investors, or APAC investors to invest in your business. Again, it will depend on where those investors are, but just remember, the minute you add an investor within your organization, you are changing the structure of your business into a joint venture versus a 100% owned entity or subsidiary. Right? So this leads me on to part 2 of today's presentation, which is how to set up and maintain a budget for your China operation. Again, it sounds like it's common sense to set up a budget. It is, everybody should be doing, but the question is, are you creating a realistic budget for your China startup? Or are you creating a budget along the terms and line items that you would create for your home jurisdiction? Okay, amendments have to always be made, all right? So we want to create a China budget that is realistic for the Chinese market, all right? And quite frankly, you can't create a budget if you do not know the extent of the opportunity that exists in China. So if you haven't done market research, if you haven't done data mining on the potential of the Chinese market, I do not know how you can create your budget. And this is, again, a mistake that many companies make, is that they don't do this form of data mining and data research and competitor benchmarking and competitor pricing to evaluate the extent of the opportunities that can exist in China for them. Obviously, if you've got a history of transactions in China, you've got it easier because you've got a history of what is existing and what could be the potential growth. For those that are brand new to the market, it's a guessing game, but we want to eliminate that guess as much as possible into actual data that you've retrieved and you have an understanding of what the potential would be. All right. Now, ultimately, a budget is there to forecast, but it is also there to control. And this is where a lot of companies set up subsidiaries in China with minimal headcount, and nobody does the task of the financial controlling. The big numbers are in the head, but the detail of actually going through each line item to really do proper financial controlling, the excuses that I get are, I don't have time for that, or it doesn't matter, Christina, in the end game, as long as we're making money. All of that matters. And again, I'm a big believer in system processes. If you don't start doing that controlling from day one, you'll never do it. And I don't know how, again, you can scale up and grow if you don't go into those details. So budgeting can be daunting. It can be a very difficult task, especially if you're not sure truly what is the potential in the market. All right. But very basic. If you're not a finance person, then let's just go through the basics, right? We've got to calculate our costs. What type of facilities do we need on the ground? Do we need a manufacturing facility? Do we need a retail shop? Are we setting up a restaurant? Are we going to be in a co-working space, or are we going to have our own commercial office spaces? What type of facilities are we choosing? The trend currently, if you're not in manufacturing and you're not in R&D, is that you will start off in a co-working space to minimize your expenditure. The next is capital expenditure, which is everything that you need to pay to improve your facilities or build up on your facilities, which would be office furniture, equipment, decorations, which again, We want to avoid that cost initially, which is why many people go into the co-working spaces. And then you've got obviously material and supplies. If you're a service company, that won't pertain to you, but if you are a trader or you're planning on manufacturing, this will be a big aspect, right? Do you need to buy raw materials? Are you supplying goods into China? Are you going to have a series of suppliers? And then separate from that, you've just got to remember that in China, there are a lot of very small costs that add up. And many of these small costs are not common in other jurisdictions. So it is a matter of really understanding what those smaller costs are, and making sure you don't overlook them, because they could impact your budget in the long term. And what, again, I'm trying to avoid is that, you can say, well, the first budget, okay, it won't be so accurate. We'll learn as we go, and the second year budget will be more accurate. Well, let's get accurate from day one, everyone, right? Let's make sure from day one we are as accurate to a 99.9% degree with all the expenses that we need to incur in China. You've got to calculate your expenses. So obviously you've got a variety of different expenses in China, whether it's fixed expenses, rent, internet packages, memberships, subscriptions, insurance. You've got variables like supplies, raw materials, shipping costs, which are extremely variable at this moment in time during the pandemic. You've got semi-variables where ultimately if your production increases or your supply increases, demand increases, then those items may go up, like overtime for employees, or electricity bills go higher, logistics costs go higher, etc. And then you've got the one-time expenses. So equipment repairs, if you've got marketing initiatives that are one-off, and it's the marketing initiatives that hit people the hardest, because that's where there's a lot of opportunity to build up your reputation and your brand in China. So I've made a list of the line items. I've done it in a very broad aspect, so otherwise I'd have look very small. But basically, when I create my budget for expenses, there's a lot of things that I add in there, and I break it down into the nitty-gritty details. So for example, when you've got cost of premises, don't just put everything into rent. Separate that into management fees, the rental amount, and the municipal taxes. If you've got staff costs, break that down into gross salary, the social insurance components, which you might want to break down into the social insurance and then housing fund. Allowances, which you might want to break down into housing allowances, meals, transportation, etc. Something I didn't add here was commissions, if you've got sales staff, bonuses, which might be year end, etc. Break it down into the nitty-gritty details. For utilities, you'll want to break it down into electricity, telephone, broadband, etc. Let me go on to advertising, marketing, reputation building, and promotion. You might be outsourcing to media agencies, but the media agencies might be doing different functions for you. So you might want to break it down into the actual marketing initiatives that the media agencies do for you, like KOLs, putting that into one line item. Social media, blasts, Douyin videos, whatever it might be, right? You might want to break that down into, again, the nitty-gritty details. When you're looking at legal and professional costs, breaking it down into insurance items. Do you need a director liability insurance? Do you need an office insurance? Do you need a travel insurance for your staff that are traveling? Breaking it down into legal fees, accounting fees, recruitment fees, whatever it might be when it comes down into these costs. Breaking it literally into the nitty-gritty details. Now, estimating your revenue is probably, like I said, really difficult to do when you're new to having never transacted in China before, okay? But again, if you've got data at your fingertips to know the extent of the opportunity that exists in China, well, you have a starting point. And if you know what your competitors are doing and you're looking at your industry trends, then you also have a bit of an understanding of what is the potential in the market, right? But let's face it, during your startup phase, and particularly during your first 12 months of operation, it's going to fluctuate. You're going to have good months and you're going to have bad months. It could be that it's because you've chosen in certain months to have KOLs and suddenly you've had a high increase of revenue. It could be that it's 11/11 and suddenly you've got a high increase of revenue again. There's going to be fluctuations. This is not a bad thing. It gives you an understanding of whether you're going to have certain peaks if you do certain marketing initiatives and where you might have troughs. It just makes it difficult to create that budget initially, right? But again, all of this planning is key. If you're deciding to use KOLs, how often are you going to use them? Are you going to have one a month, once a quarter? Are you going to have 5 different KOLs for 5 different purposes that you will use sporadically throughout the year? It's important to know what KOLs work, what KOLs don't work. You have to go into that analysis, which is why I say when you create your budget, go into the details and do that planning and match your strategic planning with your budgeting, all right? And obviously, if you talk to accountants or financial consultants in China, they might have insight into your specific industry or sectors and give you insight into what you should be thinking about for the opportunities as well. You also have to think, as I mentioned, about industry-wide seasonal trends. If you're in e-commerce, expect 11/11 to be a very high peak for you. You might expect if you use 10 KOLs in 1 month that all of a sudden you're going to have a peak as well. And understand, how you're formulating your contracts with your providers and with your customers. Okay. The key that I can't emphasize more is remain conservative. It's, we all want to over budget. We all think that there's a great opportunity in China, and there is great opportunities that exist in China. The key is making sure, at least for your first year, you're remaining conservative. Because the worst for your mindset is if you over budget, overestimate, and you don't achieve it. Your heart will sink, and it may not give you the motivation to continue. So be conservative and create control systems for your financial spending. Cash flow is king. Cash is king. We need to have a healthy cash flow status. All right. Bear in mind, I mentioned it earlier in the presentation, you will not always be able to collect money straight away. Your clients may not pay you straight away. All right. They may not pay you for 6 months. They may not pay you for up to a year, which is what I experienced last year. So you've got to make sure that you are keeping a very healthy cash flow status. All right. And you've got to make sure that even when you've got booming sales, you are keeping a reserve to pay off your expenses. Just because you've had a booming sales month does not mean now that you can overspend on marketing initiatives. Keep that reserve to make sure that you can pay your bills, your basic standardized recurring expenses, right? If you don't have that money set aside, you will find that you cannot pay wages, you cannot pay your rent, you cannot pay for the supply of goods, maybe you can't even pay for the input VAT and customs duty, you can't pay your logistics provider, etc. So if there's one thing that I will tell people to focus on as they're starting up and operating their businesses, focus on the cash flow, especially within your first year. Look at it on a daily basis. Look at how much is in your bank balance every single day. If you don't do it daily, at least every Friday. Make sure you know what is sitting in your bank. The golden rule is be conservative. Stay conservative. Highball your expenses and be prepared for low sales. It does not actually mean that you've got low sales. It actually means that money isn't coming in to pay for your expenses. You may have invoiced for things, but you're still waiting for that cash to come into your account. All right. I'm a big believer in making quick decisions in China. The market is fast. You've got to pivot your business. You've got to be flexible with your business. You've got to adapt your business. So being careful with your budget to make then sound financial decisions is important, okay? But again, be conservative about what you're doing. So that's the end of today's presentation. I'd love to know what your takeaways were. I hope I did answer most of your questions. Again, love to have the feedback from the audience. Just to finish off how you can work with me before we start the Q&A, we do a variety of different services around implementation and growth in China. So we sit down with you to create your budgets and what to think about. We help validate them. We act as a sounding board ultimately when doing that type of work. And then we can do all of the finance related issues surrounding your operation in China. If you want to reach out to me, my details are here. Maybe I can add them in a little bit later, or you can always ask Chris to do an introduction as well. And just to finish off, we've got 3 more sessions this week, all about your numbers in China. And you can register. They're up on the CBBC platform actually, but you can also register them at woodburnglobal.com/events. Chris, do you want to start the Q&A?
Thanks, Christina. That was a really interesting presentation. And as you said, if anyone has any questions, please use the Q&A function on your screens. Christina's more than happy to answer any questions that have arisen throughout that presentation. I mean, I'll just get kind of the ball rolling on 1 or 2 that I've got myself. I mean, I guess what happens if things go really badly and you do run out of cash? And kind of do you have any kind of examples of kind of what happened or what could happen if that does, if the worst does happen?
I think if the worst does happen, where you run out of your registered capital, you've used up your foreign debt loan, your head office is telling you we're not funding the business anymore, then ultimately you've got to exit the market. So the situation then is you have to go through a liquidation process to liquidate the company. In China, there's no option like in the Western world of freezing a company. It's really a matter of either you maintain it and you pay for those expenses to maintain it, or you actually liquidate. So that's obviously the worst case scenario. My feeling is you need to do that homework. I mean, if you really haven't calculated your financing appropriately and you're exiting the market, I mean, you're exiting the market for good, right? So, and that's a pity, because we all know that China is the place to be at the moment in terms of gaining any form of growth opportunity, especially when we're looking at international expansion. So I always think for those that liquidate and exit, it's a pity, because I feel like in 5 years, when they do have financial resources again, they're going to be coming back in. So I mean, again, like I said, that's worst case scenario. Others have gone through the route of finding investors, but the issue is, do you find the investors in time, right?
Yep.
So does that mean that you're going to maintain your company? It might even be put on the blacklist as you find investors. And then, how do you attract investors if you're at that stage, right? Because they're going to do a background check on you. They're going to check whether your company is in good standing with the government offices, etc. So you've got to look at the timing specifically, if that's going to work. But those are the 2 scenarios ultimately, if you run out. Okay.
So I mean, that's obviously the absolute worst case scenario. In terms of kind of preventing yourself finding yourself in that situation, how do you kind of implement spending controls on the ground in China if you can't actually get out there? How do you maintain that oversight to make sure you don't end up in the worst case scenario?
Right. So a lot of companies, when they go into China, they might not. One option is you hire an in-house team of finance folks who'll do that work for you, right? So you hire a financial controller who's going to sit in your China office. He's going to receive the budget, or he should have created the budget with you in terms of what financial financing you need, the financing you need to run your business. And he's there to overlook everything. My husband is a finance guy, and when he was in the role of financial controller, obviously he was the enemy, right? The financial controlling guys are the enemy, but they are there to protect the business for its long-term success, right? So, who was the worst people was the marketing guys, because again, the opportunities fall on your doorstep. You want to hire a KOL suddenly, or you want to do a marketing campaign, push, whatever it might be, you need spending, you need money to pay for that, right? And it is the duty of the financial controller to say, you want to do this? Fine. But what are you going to take out then from the budget?
Yep.
Right? It's to have that conversation back and forth and say, you want to do this? You think there's going to be a huge return on investment? I love the idea, but we got to take something out. Right? And this is the issue. There's none of this communication. Even if you've got the financial controller sitting in the UK or sitting in the US or in Germany, wherever it might be, there's none of this communication, right? Usually the finance folks are the last people to find out that something's happened, right? And it's a matter of just, again, simply saying, let's create a system process that, if we're going to run something, we need to get an approval from the finance department so they're aware that something is coming up. They need to sign off on it. They need to receive the estimated quotes. If you don't get a sign off, you can't do it. Full stop. Right? And obviously, when you're a small company in China, you might not necessarily have those resources, but then you can appoint someone in the head office to do that job. Right? The key is just making sure there's communication. So having weekly calls, knowing what initiatives are popping up, having that weekly communication is invaluable, right? And it's vital to make sure everything stands in place. But, if I say tomorrow, all right, now the UK's opened up, I'm going to do a business trip. Well, it just means I'm going to have to take something out of my own budget to cover that cost, right?
Yeah. So, in picking up on that communication element, I mean, you mentioned that there are some differences in kind of the ways of budgeting in China compared to the West. Could you give examples of those differences?
Sure. So, I mean, one of the most basic differences is social insurance, which everybody underestimates. So, and what's interesting in China is that social insurance rates are different from city to city. So, you can get the generic social insurance for China, and that's what many people do. And that's how they then budget without realizing that if they set up in Beijing, the rates are completely different, right? So that's already one area that they're miscalculating on costs and on spending. They look at real estate agents' websites and they say, oh, okay, well, if I look that the average rental amount is XYZ, we'll put that in the budget. Well, why don't you actually physically call the real estate agent and say, I'd like to get a quote for a 100 square meter office. How much does it cost? Or we're going to end up in a business center. Let's call 5 different business centers and see what their quotes are, right? Because what is standard on their price list on their website does not mean what is current at the moment. Nobody updates their websites anymore in China. Websites are invalid. Things are on WeChat and you do things by phone and communication, right? And you ask for physical proposals. So if you are going to providers' websites, don't rely on those quotations. Don't rely on those service fee lists or anything like that. Make sure you have those direct conversations. And again, to calculate your costs and expenses, the easiest thing is to have that conversation with your providers to get the quotes and the estimates and to start planning the marketing initiatives and know for each of those how much it's going to cost. I'm mentioning marketing a lot because right now, during the pandemic and COVID, people have been focusing a lot, not necessarily on generating business, but on promoting their businesses to be at the forefront of people's minds when they think about, as things are starting to pick up. So they're doing more and more marketing initiatives. And if you're in the consumer product sector, you're going to build up your brand by doing a lot of marketing initiatives and marketing campaigns. Make sure you've got the right estimates for each of those campaigns. And again, if a KOL is a key online influencer, if that campaign was so successful, you've got to do another one. Well, then again, look at your budget. Do you have the money to pay for another one, right? The excitement level when things work gets extremely high, and then they stop looking at the finances aspect of the business.
Interesting. If anyone does have any questions, please do use the Q&A function. I mean, you talked briefly a bit about, about using foreign debt financing to help finance your business. How, in your experience kind of working with the clients you do, how kind of willing are, foreign banks to lend to finance Chinese operations, right? Because I imagine in their calculation, there's a few steps of risks and multipliers of risk in that kind of calculation. Are they happy to do it? Is it expensive?
So I don't have any clients that have hit that avenue, that channel, in terms of asking the foreign banks for loans. What they will do is they'll use up the registered capital first. If they will then, as a second stage, go and use up the foreign debt loan.
Yep.
And before even asking a bank, they will start initiating service fees. That's usually the trend that I see. And I think the reason for that is that there is limited success asking for a loan from the foreign banks.
Yep.
Unless they ask for a loan that is required for expansion within their head office. So the head office is asking for that loan. It's not asking for a loan specific for the China organization.
Gotcha.
Right? So they bundle China with everything else, right? And then they say, we need a loan of XYZ amount. And this is why we need it. It's for things to do with the head office, China, maybe other countries that they're planning on expanding to as well. What would be interesting to know, and I don't know this statistic, is whether it is possible to get loans from the Chinese banks, for example, in the UK. So if you approach Bank of China, ICBC, that all have branches in the UK, for example, they even have branches in the US, whether there's more success there. I do not know.
Yeah, be a very interesting question, because obviously they understand the market a lot better than
right.
and potentially a foreign bank does. And so
right.
for them, it's actually in some ways an easier loan to underwrite than.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But that's usually, and then obviously the biggest trend that we're seeing is just companies looking for investors, outside investors. When I say outside investors, it's not just like silent partners. It's people that are maybe have the experience in their sector or industry, whether it's food and beverage, whether it's in high-tech machinery, whatever it might be. And, there are a lot of investors in China, but, everyone thinks about China, but in APAC in general, that are interested in expansion into China, but not just China, also Asia as a whole, right? Let's not forget that China is one market in Asia. Of course, it's the one that's growing the fastest, but you've also got Southeast Asia. You've also got, Japan, Korea, and all of these other places that are coming up as interesting markets to expand to as well. So investors is one thing that is definitely a trend that's rising.
So just on that, you mentioned obviously that becomes, it's no longer wholly foreign-owned enterprise. It then becomes a joint venture.
If they do that relationship in China.
Okay.
Yes. But ultimately, you could formulate that relationship in Hong Kong. You can formulate it in Singapore, in any other outside jurisdiction. You could formulate it in the UK, so that the money from the investor goes into the UK and then flows out into China again.
Yeah. And I guess, just for if people don't necessarily understand what that is all about, transferring from a wholly foreign-owned enterprise to a joint venture is, I imagine, quite a complicated process. And so if you could structure it.
Yeah, it's a new, I don't want to say it's a new establishment. It's not, you're still keeping that foundation, that structure that you've created. You're just amending it to have a joint venture contract. And then you've got to update your articles of association. The bank is still running, right? It doesn't mean that as you're changing that structure, you can't do business. You can. The business continues, your operations continue. It's just the restructuring of the actual entity, which, in places like the UK or Hong Kong can happen overnight. In China, it takes about 3 to 6 months to get that application up and running.
Yeah, which makes sense. So which is why, if you come up with an alternative agent of the kind of equity being put in, offshore and then bring it back in or whatever,
exactly.
That would just save some pain potentially with 3 to 6 months worth of paperwork.
Right,
yeah.
Exactly. And then you're keeping that entity as a wholly foreign-owned enterprise, right? As a foreign invested company, as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, look, Christina, thank you for today's presentation. I think it was a really interesting conversation around all things related to financing in China, making sure that you've got enough money to actually ensure the business will succeed. I'd like to quickly share some of the upcoming ones we've got lined up in this series. So obviously today we've just had the financial, so assessing if you have the financial resources to go into the Chinese market with Christina. Next week we're looking at kind of ensuring you actually get paid. So once you've got the money in China, how do you get it out? Then on the 12th, we're looking at how you use e-commerce as a first step into the Chinese market, which is particularly relevant for businesses who are unable to get out there. And then also sourcing products and managing quality control remotely, which is can be a challenge for some companies. As Christina's mentioned, we'll be sharing a recording of this presentation from today. So look out for that in your inboxes if you had to kind of jump in or out. And thank you for your time today, Christina. It was a really interesting conversation.
No, thanks, Chris. I like the moderation.
Okay. Well, thank you, everyone, and have a good day.
Thank you. Bye.